There's some very recent sad news about Virginia Giuffre, one of the women who has made accusations about Prince Andrew. She originally made an accusation about Alan Dershowitz, about Epstein.
About a whole bunch of people, Ehud Barak, Les Wexner, Jean-Luc Brunel.
What should people know about Virginia, about her story, and about her death?
Virginia had a very, very difficult life. She was molested at a very young age, and then her parents she was from a dysfunctional family, and her parents threw her into foster care where she'd run away, and they'd take her back, she'd run away. And then she ended up being on the streets, starting at about 12. And when you're a young girl to survive on the streets, there's a lot of unsavory things that are unescapable. And then she was eventually found by a pedophile named Ron Eppinger, who kept her sequestered in a apartment in Miami all day. And then pedophiles would come in during the day and pedophiles would come in at night. And then Eppinger eventually got busted, and she reunited with her father, who was working at Trump's Mar-a-Lago as a maintenance man. And he got her a job in the spa, and her dream was to become a masseuse, a massage therapist. So she had a book on it that she was reading. And there was Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine Maxwell said, I know a wealthy philanthropist, and he will put you through massage school if he likes you. So that's how she eventually got sucked into it. And she went to Epstein's home, his Palm Beach mansion home, whatever. And there Epstein was on his little table. And she had already done this innumerable times. So what Maxwell and Epstein wanted her to do came to her, unfortunately, very naturally, because she'd been molested so many times by the time she met Epstein. And Epstein didn't. The thing about pedophiles, especially ones that are pandering them to very wealthy and powerful people, you cannot really pull a kid off the street and expect them to perform for a wealthy, powerful guy. They have to be socialized. They have to be, for lack of a better word, trained. And Virginia was already trained, and she was with Epstein from 2000 to 2002. And actually, she was in the inner circle. She was flown around all over and abused by very powerful people. And what ultimately led to her break from Epstein was Maxwell gave her a ticket to Thailand and said that she could take a massage course there. They had enrolled her for a massage course in Thailand. And the reason why they wanted her to go to Thailand is they wanted her to pick up a child and take her back to the United States. And what's amazing about Virginia is she had the conscience, the moral barometer, and she didn't want to indoctrinate anyone into that life. And while she was in Thailand, she met a guy from Australia, and she told him what she was up to and why she was in Thailand. And they kind of had an instantaneous love. And he was from Australia, and she went to Australia, and they got married shortly thereafter.
How did you get to know Virginia?
I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And that was about an interstate trafficking network in the 80s that got covered up. It was very similar to Epstein's network, almost like a carbon copy of Epstein's network. And I saw what was happening in the Maxwell trial. Maxwell was the only one indicted, and she was indicted on 2 or 3 conspiracies, and no one else was indicted. And I knew that it was a cover-up. I mean, I knew beforehand that it was a cover-up, but what was getting what the feds were getting away with Maxwell, I was really, really angry about, because Maxwell was only indicted on one count of child trafficking, which is a heavy sentence in the federal system. It's 15 to life. And she should have been indicted on 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 counts of child trafficking. She should have never seen the light of day. And as I said, she was also indicted on 2 or 3 conspiracies, and no one else was indicted. So I knew that it was going to be a cover-up. And I was kind of fomenting a protest. And I wanted to protest what was going on there. So, and I put together a protest across the street from the courthouse where Maxwell was being tried. And I was tweeting about it. And that's how I met Virginia. She saw that I was very much an activist in this area, and we just kind of hit it off to a certain degree.
And a lot of people, of course, have commented that in the past, she said that she wasn't suicidal, kind of planting a seed that if something happened to her, that people shouldn't believe it's suicide. Now, it seems like she has died by suicide. That doesn't mean, of course, someone can die by suicide, and that doesn't mean that there's not a somewhat causal relationship between the person who abused them and the person who does that. I mean, that's probably too strong. I should rephrase that, because I don't want to suggest that it's kind of an inescapable outcome of it. But obviously, there's a relationship between what was done to her and her mental health struggles. Do you think this was suicide?
She tweeted that in 2019, and in 2016, she sued Ghislaine Maxwell for defamation of character, and that's where she named all the powerful men. Was in a deposition, and I think she was frightened at that point in her life, because those documents were unsealed in 2019. And people could see exactly who she named. And I think that she was frightened, but she was a true warrior. And she was, when I met her, she was really, really gung-ho on helping other survivors of sexual abuse. And we had talked quite a bit, and I put together a petition because of the miscarriage of justice that the Maxwell trial was. And she signed it. And I got to know a couple other Epstein survivors too, and they signed it. I didn't know all the ones who signed it, but I got to meet a number of them. And with Virginia, I was speaking at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a summit, international summit every year. Now, I've spoken at 3, but I was speaking at one of those, and I don't know if she asked me or if the National Center asked me, but she spoke at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation's International Summit that year, and she did a really good job. And then she had made a lot of money suing Ghislaine Maxwell, millions, and then I'm sure that she got millions from Prince Andrew, that litigation too. And she was really, really determined to open up a rehab in Florida for victims of sexual abuse, and also started an anti-trafficking NGO. And then at a certain point, she just disengaged from everybody. She disengaged from me. She disengaged from the Epstein victims that she'd befriended. And she just kind of drifted away into Australia. And that perplexed, I think, a lot of people. Why? Because she was so gung-ho at one time, and then she just kind of just drifted away.
Right. And do you have any, I mean, a lot of people were kind of confused by this post that she wrote on Instagram where she talked about having been in an accident, and she posted a photo of herself, and you can see she's black and blue. She said she only had a few days to live because she had gone into kidney renal failure. Do you have any insights into what she was talking about? Because this was this was March 30th. So it obviously was, she had more than 4 days to live, but.
Yeah, I can explain that. She got into an accident on March 24th. and she was hit by a bus, a school bus. Her car was hit by or the car that she was a passenger in was hit by a school bus. But it wasn't a big accident. And actually, the West Australia, that's the state she was in, West Australia police said that there were no injuries. But she was driven from that accident to a hospital, and physicians there said that she had some kidney related issues. And then she checked out the next day. And then about a week later, she went into a different hospital. And that picture that you saw of her was either her first or second day in that hospital. And she was in that hospital, and that was a beating that her husband administered to her. It wasn't an accident. It was a beating. From that hospital, she told People magazine that she had taken on Epstein and Maxwell, and now she had to take on the abuse of her husband. And her husband beat her up in January and preemptively filed a restraining order on her for violence. And he was awarded the 3 kids, which really broke her heart. So you've got someone that's endured a lot of trauma over the years, a lot of sexual trauma, starting at a very young age. And I don't think that her husband was initially abusive, but I think he became increasingly abusive. And you saw that picture. I mean, that picture was not an accident. That picture was a beating that he gave to her.
Wow.
And then she was discharged from the hospital, and she actually had to see a magistrate because her husband said that she'd text her, and that had broke the restraining order.
That she texted him.
Yeah, and that had contravened the restraining order. So she had to see a magistrate a couple of days after she got out of the hospital. She was at that hospital 6 or 7 days. But her attorney pled not guilty or asked for a continuance. And but she was due in court the following month.
Wow. It's really sad.
So I think what you have with Virginia is a lot of trauma and then heavy domestic abuse. And victims that have been through child sexual abuse are 3 times more likely to kill themselves than the general population. I think you had a perfect storm with Virginia. And given her abuse at a very young age, I'm pretty sure that she had dissociative identity disorder too. And that is another layer that can exacerbate someone's psychological health.
And it's so frustrating because, of course, people develop these coping skills or behaviors that are often pathologized, and then that is used to dismiss what they say. So they're abused, and they develop certain things from that abuse, and then they're not considered credible, or they're considered damaged goods, and so you can't believe what they're saying. So it's this like cycle.
Well, people that have dissociative identity disorder can definitely tell the truth. I mean, that's been shown.
I was just paraphrasing.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, but people, because I've been writing about and researching about child trafficking for 22, 23 years, I've met a lot of therapists and psychiatrists who work with people that have been through child sexual abuse. And that's definitely a powerful coping mechanism for them, is because when they're getting abused, they switch to a different alter so they don't have to feel that pain. And that just becomes part of their lives is switching altars. When they're feeling pain, they'll switch altars. So, and generally, people with DID don't really get it diagnosed till they're in their 30s. It's not a diagnosis that comes easy because usually they're run through various psychiatric providers and psychologists that really don't know what they're doing, and they're given antidepressants and antipsychotics and different psychotropics. But generally, the wheels start to come off for people with DID in their 30s. Because that system of alters starts breaking down.
And how do you know what you described about her husband being abusive? And is that something that did you ever speak to her about that, or how did you find out that information?
No, it's her brother and sister, or her brother and sister-in-law have talked about it. And as I said earlier, Virginia just disengaged from us. She was really gung-ho about starting this rehab for sexual abuse victims and starting an anti-trafficking NGO. And then all of a sudden, that was it. I mean, there was an Epstein victim that she'd come very, very close to. And she just chopped her out of her life and disengaged from, she disengaged from me. She disengaged from, I think, everybody that was affiliated with Epstein or trying to remedy Epstein. I want to set the record straight about that. But yes, her husband, the picture that you showed, that was a beating that her husband laid on her. It wasn't a crash. And I've spent since I found out about it on Saturday, I've really dug into it, and I've really worked very, very hard to discern the truth, because there's so many different stories, and I owe Virginia the truth, and I've worked pretty assiduously to find the truth in that situation. And I believe that her husband was extremely physically abused.
Yeah. And why was she? Do you know what she was referring to about having 4 days left to live?
Okay, so what her brother said was that she did, with the first hospital she went to after the crash. The doctor said that she had some kidney related issues, and he said that if you don't get help for this, you're not going to live very long, or you're not going to live 4 days. So that was taken out of context. But she was on a lot of pain medication when she made that, and actually she didn't think she was posting to Instagram. She thought she was posting to her private Facebook page. And these are things that I just kind of want to tell the truth about for Virginia and straighten out, because there's been so much misinformation regarding her case and her death.
Right. And can you shed light on what we do know about the participation of Ehud Barak and Prince Andrew? She obviously also accused initially Alan Dershowitz, and then she walked that back, which, I mean, I'd like to ask you about that. That to me does not mean that it wasn't true, given how litigious and harassing and threatening and bullying he is. So can you talk about what we do know about those three individuals?
Alfredo Rodriguez stole the Black Book. And I got a copy of the Black Book in 2012, and I put it on the internet. Well, actually, Gawker and I put it on the internet in 2015. And Alfredo Rodriguez circled a bunch of names. And what he was trying to do was he was trying to sell the Black Book to one of the lawyers that was litigating for some Epstein victims. And the lawyer called the FBI. The FBI did a sting and then got the Black Book. And the names that Rodriguez had circled had more gravitas as far as Epstein's perfidious lifestyle than those that didn't. Although there were a number of perpetrators that were in that book that he didn't circle, but he did circle. He circled Ehud Barak, he circled Les Wexner, and he circled Alan Dershowitz. And Virginia, under testimony, said that she'd been molested by all three.
Wow. Shifting gears a little bit, can you talk about the Epstein files, which you say don't actually exist? And wanted to have you respond to this video clip of Donald Trump talking about the Epstein files, but also about other cases. Let's take a look.
Mr. President, you said,
when can we expect the Epstein documents to be released? The rest of them?
Which documents?
The Epstein files?
I don't know. I'll speak to the Attorney General about that. I really don't know. I know that we've done the RFK, the Kennedy, Martin Luther King is out there very shortly, so we'll find out. But we've really announced we're doing them in full transparency. You know, when we did JFK.
So, to what extent is any of that true? I mean, have they done JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, and what have they done so far with Epstein?
I don't really focus on JFK or RFK or Martin Luther King, but I am focused on Epstein. There is no Epstein list. It's apocryphal. It's like Jeffrey Epstein ran a travel agency and he had a list of all the perps and he kept them on his refrigerator with a magnet. I mean, that's nonsensical. Epstein had a black book and he's got a lot of flight logs, and there's a lot of names of perpetrators in the black book and on the flight logs. I don't know how it got started that there was an Epstein list. It's apocryphal. Maybe people just wanted to believe that there was an Epstein list, but what there is, and what's really incriminating, is the FBI drilled Epstein's safe, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of discs. And then that was reported by the New York Times, and Business Insider reported that there was also hard drives. And the FBI agents also came across either hundreds or thousands of images of child rape material too. So Epstein had quite a cache of child rape material. And this is what's really, I mean, there's so many egregious things in the Epstein case, but this is really egregious. Those girls that were used for Epstein's cache of child rape material, those girls are going to be very, very damaged for the rest of their lives. And it's going to be very hard for them to join society. And they're going to have to work very, very hard and just to live kind of a baseline life. And because the feds were covering up Epstein and all the perpetrators, and we know who a lot of the perpetrators are, we know who a lot of the pimps are, I'm willing to bet everything I've got that the FBI didn't try to identify those victims and help them, which is, I mean, there's so many miscarriages of justice in the Epstein case, but that really sickens me that there were all those images of child rape material and the feds just ignored them, just ignored those girls. And those girls are going to be damaged for the rest of their lives.
Can you talk about what we know about Alan Dershowitz?
Well, Dershowitz, Virginia named him as a perpetrator, and Maria Farmer submitted an affidavit saying that Dershowitz went upstairs to where the young girls were. And then another Epstein victim named Sarah Ransom also submitted an affidavit that said that, and she said that she'd been had sex with Dershowitz. And if you look at Dershowitz's record, and he wrote a op-ed for the LA Times where he thought the age of consent, I think, should be 14. And it didn't really matter how old the other individual was. I think Alan has a long and illustrious history of misogyny. And why Virginia kind of walked back that a little bit, she said she may have made a mistake about Alan Dershowitz. I think that he had somehow leveraged her. I mean, that's just because she was really solid. When she litigated with Ghislaine Maxwell for the defamation of character, I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell threw a bunch of reptilian lawyers at her. And they really tried very hard to break her. And she stood strong. So I'm inclined to believe that there was some kind of extracurricular activity that Alan Dershowitz got wind of and leveraged Virginia with. And what's interesting is Virginia submitted an affidavit that said that she had been molested by Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz and Jean-Luc Brunel. Brunel was Epstein's partner in a modeling agency where they would get underage girls. A lot of them they would actually buy underage girls in Eastern Europe. And Brad Edwards and Paul Cassell were the attorneys for Virginia at that point. And Cassell was a former federal judge. And they believed Virginia, and enough to, when she said that she was molested by Alan Dershowitz, they put it in that affidavit. And then Alan Dershowitz went on the offensive. And Alan Dershowitz said, I'm going to get their law license and and, they're going to be drummed out of the legal profession. And it was the bite of a paper tiger. Actually, no one got their law license revoked. It ended up to be a stalemate. So that's one of the reasons why I think that there was some leverage on Virginia, because the litigation between Edwards and Cassell versus Dershowitz ultimately ended up in a stalemate.
I mean, he is a very pushy, I mean, it's an understatement, litigious and I think scary person. I mean, we can see how this is a totally different sphere, but obviously, Norman Finkelstein, the political scientist, he and Alan Dershowitz, debated each other. And then Norman Finkelstein exposed some shoddy scholarship, to say the least, by Dershowitz. And then Dershowitz really was successful in getting Finkelstein blacklisted and blackballed for quite a bit. But I wanted to ask you another question, which was about something that you talk a lot about, understandably, because it's very important, which is the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. Can you elaborate on that?
The Epstein Victims Compensation Fund is a scam. And basically, it's there to ensure that there's no depositions. David Boies was instrumental in crafting the parameters of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. And so was Georgiana Feldman. And David, we don't know the criteria of the Victims Compensation Program. We have no idea. The criteria that they're using is not made public. 225 women have applied for compensation. 150 have been rewarded compensation, and of those 158 have declined, because if you get money from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, you've got to sign an NDA saying that you can't go after any of your perps. So that program is being used to shut down victims that the feds couldn't shut down, and it's pretty heinous. And plus, I've spoken at a number of conferences over the years, and I've gotten to know a lot of psychologists. The International Society for the Study of Trauma Dissociation has an international conference every year. I've spoken at one of those, and I've spoken at one of their webinars. And actually, I contributed a chapter to a book that was published that a number of members of that society had contributed chapters to. And I've gotten to know a lot of therapists, a lot of psychologists, a lot of psychiatrists that work with victims of abuse. And I know a psychologist, and she's an eminent psychologist. In this field, she's known, but actually she's been on some documentaries and people would probably recognize her. And she had a client that said that she was trafficked by Epstein when she was under 10 years old. And the young woman now described Epstein's home and other things around Epstein's home, that she couldn't have possibly have known. And then I know another therapist, same type of a thing, where she had a client that said that she was trafficked by Epstein when she was under 10. Neither one of those girls got any kind of compensation from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program. And that is because, according to those therapists, they didn't fit the cover story. The cover story is that the youngest girl that was molested by Epstein was 14, which, is pretty heinous. But I think that Americans would be even more outraged if they knew that Epstein was trafficking girls under the age of 10. And actually, there was an Australian newspaper that reported that Epstein's victims were as young as 11 or 12. But the American media there's so much negligence and malfeasance involved in the Epstein case. The American media is really good at digging up salacious dirt about the perpetrators, but they don't really seem to care about the victims. And I'm not aware of one media outlet that has screamed for justice in the Epstein case. And I started an organization, it's called Epstein Justice, and you can find us at epsteinjustice.com. And there was a big document dump last January, and CNN contacted me. And because I was the guy that put the black book on the internet, they wanted to talk to me about the document dump. And then I talked to the producer, and we were texting throughout the day. And then I said to him, while we're talking about this document dump and these documents, I'd like to talk about Epstein Justice too, because I told him the organization. And then I got a text about 10 minutes later that said, Nick, we're going to go another direction. So,
and not have you on?
No.
Right.
That's happened to me a few times with the mainstream media.
And so what does this organization do that you have?
What we're doing with Epstein Justice is we want a congressional commission. And with a congressional commission, you can have independent investigations. And we want a congressional commission to look into Epstein. And it's pretty simple what we want, at least morally. We want to know why the government covered up child trafficking. When you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So we want to know why the government is aiding and abetting child trafficking in the Epstein case. And we want the perpetrators who molested all those little girls to be prosecuted. Now, you think that would be a slam dunk in a moral society, but we're going to need a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. And that's what we're working for right now, is achieving a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate for an independent commission. And when people hear about commissions, they think of like commissions that, like the Warren Commission, that I don't think gave us a lot of truth. But congressional commissions have given us truth in the past. They've been different than presidential commissions.
Like the Church Commission?
Well, the church hearings were amazing. I mean, the church hearings gave us COINTELPRO, which was the FBI domestic spying program. They gave us Operation Chaos, which was the CIA domestic spying program. They showed that the CIA had funneled money to homicidal, genocidal dictators. And there were a lot of things that came to the fore with the Church Commission. And that's the kind of commission that we need. But it would be really simple. I mean, if the government wanted indictments in the Epstein case, they could have them tomorrow. I mean, it's really that simple. The New York Times wrote a full page article on 6 of the Epstein pimps. One was Ghislaine Maxwell, one was Sarah Kellen, one was Leslie Groff, one was Adriana Ross, Nadia Marcinkova, and Haley Robson. And only one of them was indicted, and that's Ghislaine Maxwell. Kellen, Groff, Ross, and Marcinkova knew all about that network. And there's a New York Times article that shows that they do. I mean, you could take that New York Times article and give it to a grand jury. And of course, you could call them. They would take the fifth. You could indict them all. on child trafficking. And as I said earlier, that's a heavy sentence, child trafficking. In the federal system, it's 15 to life. So if you give those women 5 or 6 lifetimes in prison, or if that's what they're looking at, they're going to roll over on the perps. I mean, that's how simple it would be. It wouldn't be complicated to start getting indictments on those. They're called procurers in the article, I believe, but they're really pimps.
Right.
So the government and actually the media has been very disingenuous when they give us this story that, well, they don't know who this person is or that person. Then the Department of Justice knows exactly who the pimps and perpetrators are. And that's what's really galling, is that this could be taken care of pretty quickly if there was a will in the Department of Justice, if the Department of Justice wasn't so corrupt.